Honourable members, we move to item 2, questions, and I would just like to congratulate members for taking advantage of the starred questions option that is now available to you. So we come to question 1 on a call on the Honourable Member for Arbury Castletown Maloo, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask the Treasury Minister what assessment has been made of the impact of rising interest rates on households and businesses. Thank you.
I call on Sinead Shockatashti, Treasury Minister, to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Arbury Castletown and Maloo for his question and also congratulate him for being the first to use the newly introduced starred question system. I hope he is suitably impressed by my response. Whilst the Bank of England's monetary policy decisions are wholly out of our control, the nature of our relationship with the United Kingdom means decisions on interest rates have a direct impact on households and businesses in the Isle of Man. The overall makeup of our island's housing stock is somewhat different to the UK, with more households owning their property outright. 25% of Isle of Man households are paying a mortgage on their property in 2021, compared with 30% in the UK, and 39% of Isle of Man households owned their property outright, compared to 33% in the UK. These differences mean that the island's experience of increasing interest rates will be somewhat different to that in the UK, with a lower proportion of households paying a mortgage on their property. Treasury regularly monitors movement in the Bank of England base rate, inflation and cost metrics. Forecasts for future rates and other economic variables form a standing agenda item at the weekly Treasury Board meetings. In terms of the impacts of rate rises on price indices, CPI and RPI measures are published monthly by Statistics Isle of Man. The Economic Strategy Board is also currently investigating the availability of more detailed information on the Isle of Man mortgage and lending market. Thank you.
Supplementary. Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister, for that very detailed answer. When does the FSA and the Isle of Man Treasury expect, where does the Isle of Man Treasury and the FSA expect interest rates to be in 12 months' time? Is there any indication of any thoughts in terms of that? And have Social Security and any third sector organisations reported any concerns about rising mortgage payments on the level of disposable income of local people? And has the Department and the Minister actually considered any potential support? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. In answer to that series of questions, Mr President, first of all, the FSA is about financial regulation rather than the monitoring of interest rates. If the Honourable Member would care to go to the economic dashboard that we publish, that uses an awful lot of information gained from the United Kingdom, but also from the OECD in terms of projections of interest rates of inflation. However, they are just projections, and unfortunately we've seen that global economic and political issues have affected those projections. In terms of looking 12 months into the future, I think the outcome is still a little bit uncertain, unfortunately. We know that inflation is coming down, particularly on our island, but interest rates are still high in the United Kingdom and across here, and the monetary policy of keeping those interest rates high to fight inflation is still being adhered to by the Bank of England. In terms of his question about concerns expressed from both third sector organisations and also other people involved in interest rate increases, I did meet with representatives of the Banking Association yesterday and asked them about that. They are obviously seeing people concerned, particularly when they come off fixed rates and have to renegotiate another rate. And I would encourage anyone who has concerns about their mortgage to talk to their lenders. There are a variety of things that can be put in place in terms of extending the duration of the loan or going to an interest-only product as well. So they are looking very much at that. In terms of our feedback from the third sector and debt management debt counselling service, we haven't seen any specific issues regarding mortgages or problems with taking back houses and those sort of aspects, but we are continuing to monitor that situation. In terms of his final query, which was about support being offered, particularly from Social Security, again, if people are running into problems with their budgets, they are concerned about being able to pay not just their mortgages, but from a business point of view, their interest on loans, or from a household point of view in terms of their rents, please reach out to the Social Security Department for advice in what benefits you might be eligible for and what extra support should be available. But Treasury as a whole will be monitoring the situation as we go through the following months, and obviously any extra support will be announced at the next budget. Thank you.
Supplementary, Lauder.
Good morning, Director. The Minister will be aware of UK reports of a lag between the rise in interest rates and the savings rates that are available through banks. Is he monitoring the gap in between savings rates, especially between the Isle of Man and the UK, where sometimes you can get a better interest rate on savings in the UK than you can in the Isle of Man? Did he raise this with in his meeting with the bankers yesterday and set the expectation that Manx savers shouldn't be second-class savers?
Minister to reply.
Well, thank you very much. And that's a very interesting other side of the increase in interest rates. And I think that Mr. Speaker is absolutely right, that whilst the original question was about the costs to people, also there are benefits to those people who have savings, who for the first time in over a decade are actually getting some interest on those savings. In terms of the interest rates being offered, and I know that the Chancellor has met with the various banks in the United Kingdom, there is obviously going to be a different lag there between interest rates going up for lenders and those for investors. Certainly on the Isle of Man, I don't think lenders are second class in any way. In fact, the Daily Mail has recently publicised that we have some of the best interest rates available to people who want to invest here, although some of the regulations regarding the protection of those is slightly different, but is on par with the Channel Islands. And I've answered a question in another place regarding that. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. At yesterday's meeting with the bankers, were any concerns actually raised about the potential impact on the wider market in terms of the local economy, the housing market and local businesses? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Again, in terms of the number of mortgages being extended, that is monitored on the economic dashboard, and we've been monitoring that quite closely. In terms of the feedback from lenders, people are being more cautious in terms of taking out mortgages. I think what we've seen, particularly over the last 12 months, is a rapid increase in house prices. At the same time now is a rapid increase in interest rates. And I think it's absolutely right that people take stock of their budgets and see what they can afford, and perhaps when they want to either sell their house and move into another house, or get on the housing ladder in the first place. But certainly from the response from the Bankers Association was that although the market has cooled down a little bit, and we could actually argue that it had overheated, particularly in terms of the availability of properties, there was still a healthy market there and still a lot of interest for people to own their own home or renegotiate their mortgage details. Thank you.
Final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. The last data set from the FSA, which covered this area, came out in March. Over the last 4 months, things have changed quite dramatically. Has the FSA been in regular contact with the Treasury about changes in this area? And do they have any concerns about going forward in specific areas like buy-to-let mortgages? Because there seems to be an increasing number of those being issued in recent years, and as interest rates have gone up, there's potential impact there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In terms of any concerns from the FSA, no, I have regular meetings with them, and they haven't expressed any particular concerns. I think the situation we're now in is very different to previous situations where we had problems with the housing market, in that we have over full employment. People are still in their jobs, they're still earning wages, those wages are going up, but what we are dealing with is an increase in housing costs and also an increase in interest rates. But we haven't seen any evidence at the moment that there are particular aspects in terms of the housing market or people's mortgages, although this is a stressful time for many people if they're coming to the end of a fixed interest deal and therefore looking to renegotiate that. And also, again, I just reiterate that if people are in that position or are concerned, please reach out to your lender, because there are a variety of products on offer to try to cushion that blow and cushion that transition. In his original question, he asked about how things were going to progress over the next 12 months. I hope that in 12 months' time we can look back at this period and see it as a re-evaluation, a rebalancing of the market, and hopefully move on to a time where housing is far more affordable for the people who need it. Thank you.
Let's move on to question 2, and I call on the Honourable Member for Arbury Castletown Maloo, Mr Morehouse. Mr Glover, apologies.
Arbury Castletown and Maloo leading the way. I'd like to ask the Minister for the Treasury whether he believes the available funding for the Information Commissioner's Office is adequate.
Mr Shokataski, Treasury Minister, to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question and congratulate him for being only the second member to use the newly introduced starred question system. The Information Commissioner's Office net budget for 2023-24, agreed by Tynwald in February, is some £246,000, comprising income of £139,000 and expenditure of £385,000. The net budget of the Information Commissioner's Office in 2021-22 was £150,000 and in 22-23 was £153,000. The net budget position therefore increased by some £93,000 in 2023-24. This position reflects a realignment of the budget to be closer to the actual income raised and expenditure incurred. It also includes an upward adjustment of the initial budget proposals of approximately £22,000 made after representations from the Information Commissioner's Office. The budgets for public sector bodies are considered as part of the annual budget process, and inevitably not all bodies get the budget they desire. The budget, by its very nature, is a process of prioritisation and compromise. I've already agreed that the budget for the Information Commissioner's Office will be subject to review after consideration of the outcome of the exercise commissioned for that purpose. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr Glover.
Gurumaya Dr. Would the Treasury Minister agree, though, that the Office has undertaken and is increasingly undertaking greater responsibilities as the arbitrator under the Freedom of Information Act and a lot of additional tasks and functions under the applied GDPR? So resourcing this is vital for the correct checks and balances to be in place.
Minister, to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And I agree with the Honourable Member. We've seen a growth in the responsibilities and the duties of the Information Commissioner's Office as our legislation has been implemented and tweaked to make it fully compliant with that of the EU and wider afield. And so that's why a review has been carried out of the structure and function of the Information Commissioner's Office, and that review will be implemented by the interim ICO, and the appointment of that is later on in the order paper. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr Glover.
Gurumaya Dr. I thank the Minister for his statement on the figures, but it does seem at odds with what the outgoing Information Commissioner was saying, and that he is claiming that the budget is going down. There have been repeated attempts to have an extra member of staff to lighten the load, and that this had a devastating effect on the office staff and was the direct cause of the Commissioner stepping down. I'd like to just clarify the budget situation, because what we've had in answer here doesn't tally with what the Information Commissioner outgoing is saying.
Minister, to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And again, I don't necessarily want to comment on things that I understand have been put on social media. If I can just reassure honourable members that really the new budget process for the 23-24 Pink Book was put in place to allow each government body the flexibility and freedom to prioritise allocation in detail from the overall net budget position. The overall assumption used in the 23-24 budget resulted in an initial uplift of £25,000 for the Information Commissioner's Office above and beyond the net budget the Office had in 2022-23. The new process was also intended to give bodies the opportunity to realign any historical mismatches between budget targets and actual results. The response from the Information Commissioner's Office to the initial net budget position made it clear that they had identified the income target as unachievable. Given this, Treasury officers compared budget to actual performance in recent years and confirmed underachievement against income targets had been a trend alongside underspending against expense targets. As a result, the available options to rebase the budget to more accurately reflect recent performance was explored. As a result of the rebasing process, an additional expenditure budget of £46,000 was allocated. Following continued discussions between Treasury and the Information Commissioner's Office, it was agreed that a further £22,000 would be provided to ensure sufficient funding was retained to cover ongoing staff training costs. In summary of the above, the 2023-24 budget for the Information Commissioner's Office was increased by a net £93,000, which is an increase of 60%. In terms of the workload of the staff, I've met with the staff of the Information Commissioner's Office. They are extremely dedicated to their role and take it extremely seriously. I think they have obviously been faced with greater responsibilities, as the Honourable Member has outlined, and part of the role of the new interim ICO will be to look at the structure and resources available, look at any extra staffing, and there has been provision in the budget for an extra member of staff for several years that hasn't been taken up, but also look at the extra training. And again, there is budget for training for those staff, which again in the past hasn't been taken up, but hopefully by working together we can make sure that this important office is both resourced and staffed adequately. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Treasury Minister assure this Honourable Court and the wider public beyond that he'll commence the review with an open mind and will conclude the review taking into account any evidence that's presented with regarding, for instance, the comparative expenditure on this sort of office in similar places to the Isle of Man, and secondly, taking into account the comment back in the 2018 Pink Book that until the impact of things like the GDPR legislation is known, it is not possible to identify what resources will be required, because I do note that back in 2018 the net expenditure was already £185,000.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank the Honourable Member for his question. A review of the structure and resources available to the Information Commissioner's Office has already been carried out. That review will now hopefully be being able to be implemented by the interim ICO when they take up their post, and working with the staff there and with Treasury, we can ensure that we have adequate resourcing for this very important office. Thank you.
Move on to... apologies, supplementary, Lauder.
Can I just ask the Treasury Minister, when he first received an indication that the net increase of £93,000, including provision for an extra member of staff, was an unacceptable level of increase to the Information Commissioner and would lead to the inevitable resignation that we've seen?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Again, I don't necessarily want to get involved with people's comments on social media or their resignations or reason for that at this point. I had conversations through email with the ICO at the time of the budget round and the proposals. I took those extremely seriously. I arranged to meet with the staff, including the Deputy Information Commissioner, and went through the issues they were having in terms of resourcing, staffing and training, and as a result of that their budget was increased and then was passed by this Honourable Court in February. I'm very, very sorry that the ICO has taken the decision to resign his post, and I thank him for all his work in terms of implementing some of the large bits of legislation that were passed by this Honourable Court. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr President. Could the Minister confirm that any such review of the office is going to be given, including making the Information Commissioner's Office into a statutory board, as it is in Jersey, with 22 members of staff, as it is in Guernsey, with 50 members of staff? And I would suggest that ours, with 5 or 6, is somewhat light. Could he confirm that that consideration will be given? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank the Honourable Member for his comparison with various other small jurisdictions who spend a very large amount of money on their Information Commissioner's Office, who often have a wider scope than ours, but nonetheless have more people doing the work are better resourced and have a much larger budget. Again, any budget that's determined has to come through this honourable court. Increasing that budget substantially would obviously mean taking money from other areas of government, and I think that needs to be borne in mind. But certainly I can reassure him that in terms of the review of the structure, the governance and also the resourcing behind the Information Commissioner's Office has taken into account various board structures and taken into account what extra resources in terms of staffing and training would be necessary to make sure that their actions and functions are effective at all times. Thank you.
Thank you. And final supplementary, Mr Glover.
Gurumai, Dr. N. Would the Minister agree, though, that a well-funded, well-staffed information office is vital for transparency and scrutiny?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm quite happy to agree with that. Again, as I've said in my original answer, a part of the budget process is to determine what budget is necessary to provide that analysis and provide that security. And Treasury, as we go through the next budget process, will be aiming to achieve that. But this is really determined on making sure that the Information Commissioner's Office is resourced properly, but also, from a Tynwald perspective, they're given the right legislation to actually apply for our island to satisfy our international obligations. Thank you.
Move on to question 3. I call on the Honourable Member for Rushen. Lauder.
Good morning, Dr. M. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what cultural improvement programmes Manx Care has undertaken in 2022-23, what the expected outcomes were, how much they cost, whether Manx Care considers them successful, and what plans are in train for 2023-24.
Before I call the Sheveshok Slant Correlateer, I note that he has forwarded to members an extended reply. Just invite the Sheveshok if he wishes to add to that reply first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel I should also congratulate the member on figuring out how to use the starred question system, but other than that, I don't think I've anything to add to the answer that was circulated yesterday.
Call on Lauder for supplementary.
Well, good morning, Dr. M, and good morning, Sheveshak. I thank him for his advance answer, which shows the activity, and he'll forgive me if I query its effectiveness. One of the statements that is in the answer that was provided yesterday is that, and I quote, "there is no clear organisation-wide baseline from which cultural improvement can be measured," end quote. And I would say that we have pulse surveys going back to 2011. So I suppose the first question I need to ask is, will the Minister accept the validity of those pulse/have-your-say surveys and resist the temptation to keep moving the goalposts to prevent comparability of data?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The question was about Manx Care's internal staff surveys and staff processes around workforce and cultural improvement. I'm not in a position to make any commitments on their behalf. I'm not familiar with the Pulse Survey programme, but I'm more than happy to look into it and make sure that, as the Honourable Speaker points out, that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Supplementary, Lauder.
Good morning. I mean, the Pulse Survey, which will cover the same staff, admittedly, they who were in Manx Care at the time, so perhaps that's something for the mandate process to ensure that there is consistency in that survey. The Minister will also be aware of the Culture of Care Barometer that was published recently, which surveyed both medics within Manx Care and GP partners. In that survey, 76% surveyed disagreed with the statement that Manx Care has a positive culture. Only 1% strongly agreed. And so I suppose the obvious question is, how would the Minister answer that question? Would he strongly agree, neither agree or disagree, or strongly disagree?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's worth highlighting the Speaker is incorrect there. That survey was undertaken by the BMA, I believe.
Yes. King's College London.
It was undertaken by people who are members of BMA, a number of whom I know do not work for Manx Care, and yet you did also respond to the survey. So those results, I think, have to be taken with a little bit of salt. What I would say, though, is we have quite a lot of work going on around the external inspection processes of Manx Care. We have a lot of commentary from the CQC. We have 70 or so reports that have been published by the CQC which talk extensively about culture. And it is fair, I think, to say that in some areas of Manx Care there are definite cultural issues, there are definite barriers to change. But in other areas, staff feel very valued, they feel respected and listened to. There is not a single uniform statement I think I could make about the state of culture in the workforce of Manx Care, and I would hesitate to try and lump everybody into the same box, I think, as the Culture of Care Survey attempts to do, and as the Speaker is trying to do as well. I think there are very serious issues in some parts of the organisation. We've accepted that for quite some time. I've been open talking about this, had a very productive meeting with the BMA Chair talking about that survey and the response and how we can proactively work together to try and improve culture. But ultimately, I'm nervous about trying to put everybody in the same box and say everything is wrong or everything is good. I think neither of those statements would be fair.
Supplementary, Mrs Kinnish.
Thank you, Mr President. I just want to touch on the 23-24 plans that are mentioned, clearly by Manx Care. They make reference to establishments of networks to represent different groups. Networks are a really effective forum, not just to create a sense of belonging, but to identify issues affecting employees that can be escalated to management through a safe forum. It does concern me that there are only 2 groups referenced in the plan, and it could be that these are just initial groups, but that in itself doesn't feel inclusive. The first is BAME, which stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic, and then LGBTQ. Both of these terms actually are not considered fully inclusive, and I feel that these should be revisited. But my concern is that are other groups represented, and will they be?
Could you pose a question to the Minister?
Yes, I will.
That's not a statement,
I will,
it's
Mr.
question
President. I will. What I would like to know is whether those other groups will be represented, and whether there will be some engagement to ensure that they are fully represented in the future plans. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a really good question. My understanding of the way these programmes are being developed is they're being predominantly led from the staff side, so they are being developed in conjunction with staff to try and address the issues that staff are identifying. I work on the assumption, therefore, that the reason these 2 particular groups have been identified is because that's where staff see there is potentially an issue. I'm happy to go back to Manx Care and just clarify to make sure that no one is going to be excluded or feels like they're going to be excluded from these cultural programmes. But like I say, I think it is right to listen to staff and take this organisation in the direction that staff feel it should go in, rather than have us dictate from the top down.
Supplementary, Lauder.
Good morning, just to point out to the Minister that the May 2021 cultural assessment results covered 417 Manx Care respondents. They got particularly low scores around feeling valued, feeling listened to and inspired by the organisation at 5.3 and 4.7 out of 10 respectively. There is no data for 2022 or 2023. Will the Minister accept that there is a need for more frequent staff surveys rather than once every 2 or 3 years in order to judge the culture of an organisation? And would he provide an answer to the earlier question of whether he believes that Manx Care has a positive culture?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The answer that I circulated yesterday makes quite explicit the intention to have much more regular staff surveys. I would encourage the Honourable Member to read the answers that are provided in advance. In respect of answering my views on Manx Care's culture, I've tried to do that already. There is no one single answer for that question, because you're dealing with so many staff in so many different types of roles, so many different backgrounds, so many different parts of the organisation. There are 3,000 or so people that work for Manx Care. I think, broadly speaking, I wouldn't want to stick any of them into a single box and say this is how it works across the organisation. That is not appropriate. I don't think it makes sense for anyone to try and do that. We need to start treating staff like individuals, rather than trying to say, well, let's make a broad, sweeping statement that tries to cover everybody. I don't think that works, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Supplementary, Mr Glover.
Hi, Dr. I was going to ask about more recent data myself as well, but in the light of the fact that the question is being answered while a protest amongst nurses is taking place outside Tynwald, would the Minister like to identify where he believes culture within Manx Care needs improving?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Again, I would draw members' attention to a number of CQC reports that have been published that are available on the Department's website. They go into this question in quite some detail. They identify some very specific areas of the organisation where there is a cultural problem, where there are needs to improve. There are many. I'm not going to shy away from that reality. I'm not going to go through them all. Like I say, the reports are all public. Members are free to read them, and to, if anyone has any questions about those reports and about the particular areas that are identified, I'm more than happy to have those conversations. There is no shying away from the scale of the problem that is being faced and the challenge that is in front of us. It needs to be tackled. I believe it is being tackled, but it will take some time.
Final supplementary, Lord.
I don't mind taking the pinch of salt that the Minister requests, but I mean, when only 1% of medics now appreciate that, as far as I'm aware of, that only covers Manx Care medics and GPs, But if there are people who are being surveyed from around the Norwich area that are going into that survey, I would be surprised. So that's important to know. But in terms of the 2021 survey, and again, not trying to lump everyone into the same basket, but the lowest scores in terms of confidence in leadership were in the hospital and in social care. The highest were in mental health and integrated primary and community care. So given the recent results from Medics and that Pulse survey from 2021, what focused work does he expect and what changes does he expect over what timescale to improve things up, specifically at the hospital and in social care?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think all the work that's ongoing has been extensively detailed in the lengthy answer that I circulated yesterday.
Members, we now move on to question 4. A call on the honourable member for Garth. Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ahead of asking the question, I should point out, just to declare the interest for the record once again, that I am currently the chair of the Douglas Bay Tramway Heritage Trust. But my question is to the Chief Minister as the Minister for Infrastructure. How Heritage Railways maintenance will be impacted by the reduction in budget, and whether the SISTRA review will consider reductions in lengths of line or rolling stock?
Call on Siobhan Troglas, Minister for Infrastructure, to reply.
Mr. President, the reductions in this year's budget will primarily impact the capital programme in terms of the renewals identified in the Railways Asset Management Programme. The list of major schemes impacted by the reduction this year includes the completion of a number of track renewal programmes on the Snaefell Mountain Railway, Snaefell Workshop Yard, Snaefell to Bungalow track renewal continuation, and the Snaefell overhead line renewal. On the Steam Railway, Oak Hill to Kerristal track renewal completion. On the Manx Electric Railway, Eskdale track renewal completion and Ballagori-Ballaglass track renewal, and Waterloo Road Yard and restoration of Waterloo Road Tram Storage Depot building in Ramsey. Restrictions in the revenue budget have also affected the completion of repair works to some locomotives and require a pause in recruitment for the replacement of some roles, which has affected the progress of a number of rolling stock projects. The terms of reference for the SISTRA review have been available for some time now, and they do not refer to reductions in length of lines or rolling stock. They do clearly state that the cost-benefit viability of each major section of the railway on a standalone and combined basis will be analysed. Likewise, the terms of reference ask the consultants to examine the appropriate levels of investment in rolling stock when compared to other networks. This is to contribute to the overall objective of giving us a full picture of the operation of the Heritage Railway network in its entirety. I would suggest respectfully that waiting for the review to be completed would be beneficial at this stage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I have to disagree with the Chief Minister, because in the terms of reference for the SISTRA review that's currently ongoing, there is specific reference to economic benefits, analysis of the cost-benefit viability of each major section of the railway on a standalone and combined basis, including evaluation of the impact of the length of the horse tramway and extending MER operations to the War Memorial. But it also asks for consideration of the alternative use of any railway assets found to be no longer required. We all want to be the most efficient we can, but can I ask the Chief Minister, is this yet another bite at the cherry to try to do what the SAVE report had SISTRA do previously, change the terms of reference? So is everything on the table? Is closure potentially of sections of our Heritage Railway network what he would feel was acceptable to save money? Thank you, Mr. President.
Calling the Minister to reply.
Well, I think it's important, Mr. President, that we look at these matters from time to time, and that proper consideration is given to what will be the most sustainable way to operate trams and trains into the future. And that's the purpose of doing that in-depth analysis, is to properly understand the detailed infrastructure costs and the cost-benefit analysis, so that politically we can understand how much it costs to run the railways, and then make appropriate decisions in terms of funding levels and what sort of appropriate structure might be considered moving forward. And I think that until that information is now completed and can be properly analysed, and I think it's important that it's done also from a public basis as well, then we will not be in a position to reach any form of conclusions.
Supplementary, Mr. Glover.
Would the Infrastructure Minister just confirm that he read out a long list of track replacements that were not being actioned? Has an audit of impacts on safety been conducted as well?
Just to reply.
Well, clearly, Mr. President, safety is of the utmost critical importance. I can tell you that in any safety issues on tracks, then clearly then the service would not be running. But I will provide full details to the honourable member of the latest audits in terms of the safety of tracks.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. Along with safety, Mr. President, the length of line is critical to maintaining passenger journeys and revenue. As an example, the information I have is horse trams recorded 80,000 passengers in 2018 with an upward trend, sadly the final year of the full track length. Under 11,000 passengers were carried in 2022 with the shortened track. Meanwhile, the steam, electric and mountain railway have all fully recovered to exceeded pre-COVID passenger levels. So when will the options, cost and business case for completing the horse tramway be published, or is that waiting on the SISTRA review, and is it actually about a reduction in the railways rather than a review?
Minister to reply.
Well, I think with the greatest of respect, I think the honourable member is trying to get me to preempt the conclusions of the SISTRA review, and my advice to the honourable member and the House is that we should get that review done so that we can all properly see and analyse the cost of the railways and a potential cost-benefit analysis, and then make whatever conclusions are needed from that piece of work.
Supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Chief Minister agree with me that the SISTRA review is being done in good faith and we should wait for the conclusions of it? Secondly, though, does the Chief Minister agree with me that it's only fair for me not to boost knockers or knock boosters by picking up on facts equally on both sides, but it's wrong to compare 2022 figures with 2018 figures for horse tramways, given the horse tramway only ran for a few months in 2022 compared to a full year in 2018. And secondly, would the Chief Minister agree with me that the capital budget for Heritage Rail set by Treasury and approved by Tynwald in 24-25 does indeed reduce from 4.5 million to 1.5 million, which is quite a substantial reduction?
Minister to reply.
Well, I'm not going to knock the boosters or boost the knockers or do whatever else the Minister is fond of. But what I will say to the honourable member is I thank him for the work that he has done on this, and I think I too would be wary of doing direct cost comparisons to operations that were taking place 5 or so years ago. I think it's important that as we know, costs change rapidly in the world that we're living in at the moment, and therefore we do need to get the latest up-to-date analysis in order to make the most considered decisions on these matters.
On a supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Chief Minister agree that the railways are not only about the cost benefit for the Isle of Man, the economic benefit, there's also a quality of life benefit for those living on the island, and indeed when he is the island plan seeks to increase the population to 100,000 people, and the visitor agency increasing the visitors to 500,000 a year. Does he not think that an extensive public transport heritage rail network is going to be key in moving all those people around the island, not clogging up the roads?
Minister to reply.
I'm sure we all agree that the Heritage Railway network is a prime asset for the island, but nevertheless that shouldn't prevent honourable members undertaking supporting statements and also prioritising work on the Heritage Railways and determining in what shape and format the Heritage Railways should continue operations, because that is in the public interest to do so. And no matter how difficult those who actively support the Heritage Railways, and I include myself in that, find these types of pieces of analysis, nevertheless it's important that they're done, and it's important that we review the findings in the cold light of day, and we consider the prioritisation against other prioritisation of a very highly pressurised budget at the moment. I would regard these reviews, whether it's the Sistra review or the broader consultation that's taking place into the Heritage Railways as an opportunity, I hope, to put the Heritage Railways into a more put the Heritage Railways onto a more sustainable footing and identify how and where the appropriate levels of funding are going to come from.
Move on to final supplementary, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Chief Minister agree with me that another element of the Sistra Heritage Rail review is actually on the use of the Heritage Rail for passenger transport and freight transport? And does the Chief Minister also agree with me that it would be important for Sistra to coordinate with the decarbonisation scenarios review for transport, which is also complete, I believe, where they look at exactly the same question about whether we can actually use our Victorian important heritage infrastructure for freight and passengers?
Minister to reply.
Well, I think just on that latter point, I think that the issue of sort of decarbonisation has to be clearly looked at appropriately. But in answer to the thrust of his question, yes, I agree.
Now move on to question 5. I call on the Honourable Member for Arbury, Castletown and Maloo, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Chief Minister what advice ministers have been given about the use of social media and whether their comments are monitored or assessed in any way. Thank you.
Call on Ed Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Electronic Communications and Social Media Policy Standards and Guidelines from 2015 sets out the roles and responsibilities in relation to the use of social media and electronic communications. This policy and guidance is referenced in the Government Code and applicable to ministers under section 1.11, which states, "In all matters relating to the business of Council, particular care should be given in the use of electronic communications and social media to maintain confidentiality and impartiality." Mr. President, the Social Media Policy Standards and Guidelines 2015 includes guidance relating to the standards to follow when using social media as an individual, part of your job, or posting onto a government channel, as well as security, safety and privacy tips for anyone using social media. Mr. President, upon their appointment, ministers are signposted to the Government Code as previously mentioned. The Electronic Communications and Social Media Policy Standards and Guidelines is referenced in that code. With regards to the monitoring of comments, it is important to bear that there is a distinction between social media accounts operated by the Isle of Man Government and personal or constituency accounts operated by members of Tynwald who are also ministers. Government officers are not responsible for managing or monitoring personal or constituency accounts of ministers. The content of such social media posts is a matter for the individual minister. Any posts and comments should, however, comply with the requirements set out in the Government Code and the relevant social media policy standards and guidelines to which I have referred.
Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President and Chief Minister. Having been made aware of the code, our updates provided, it's increasingly common to see tweets and other comments on social media from government ministers. Does the Chief Minister recognise that there are dangers of ministers commenting in such a manner, or is free speech seen as being important? And if so, how does it meet with these expectations and the standards that have been traditionally expected from government ministers? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Well, Mr. President, it's not for me to determine how ministers or individual members choose to express their views in whatever format. My primary concern is that ministers do adhere to the Government Code, and that is my primary focus in terms of ensuring that appropriate adherence to that code and vis-à-vis collective responsibility is applied.
Supplementary, Dr. Allison.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And although the question is primarily about ministers, would the Chief Minister agree with me that it's actually the responsibility of all Tynwald members, when they're interacting with constituents or other people on social media, to conduct themselves properly? Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that would be certainly the recommended advice. There are obviously channels for individuals who are dissatisfied with any member's conduct, whether that be on social media or otherwise, to appropriately raise those issues. And of course, in breach of government code, then that matter is obviously should be referred to me in the first instance.
Supplementary, Mr. Glover.
Does the Chief Minister, though, accept that ministers are on a slightly more elevated platform, and we've seen childish repeated replies from one minister on social media of late? We've seen comments about the situation at QE2 from another minister of late as well. There is a higher threshold, and we need to, all of us in here, bear that in mind, but also to the questioner. Is there not the case that putting out comments about your questions on social media shouldn't be happening anyway, because they should be happening in here?
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, Mr. President, I mean, as I said, I would suggest to all honourable members that they should consider how they engage themselves on social media. I am not saying that I am disinterested into how ministers conduct themselves, but clearly, the guidelines are clearly set out from a ministerial perspective in the government code, and social media is an open forum. Personally, I try to use it in a proper and considered basis, but I am aware that honourable members choose to use social media for their own political purposes and to engage in debate. I leave it at that, Mr. President.
Final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Chief Minister's comments are reassuring from the perspective that there's clarity in terms of a code, but it's also concerning in terms of the laid-back approach that appears to be being applied here. In terms of what's gone on in the past 12 months, have any ministers actually been spoken to by the Chief Minister about the situation, or are they simply off radar? It's been an ongoing issue in many areas. It was first raised by a constituent of mine with regard to the Desk Minister being criticised by another minister, and it just seems to be an ongoing issue that I'm really quite concerned that it's being tolerated rather than dealt with. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, Mr. President, I'm not the school principal, and ministers and members, as we know, have a large responsibility on themselves to conduct themselves properly and in a manner that they deem as appropriate. I've just said to the honourable member, I'm not disinterested, but clearly there is a clear guideline for me, specifically in the government code, regarding when matters are of a serious enough nature to launch an investigation or to discuss matters formally with a minister. Some of the matters that are raised are often much broader discussions that a minister is engaging in. Some of them are constituency issues, some of them could be other areas in which the minister feels that they need to respond to or put forward a position on social media. But equally, Mr. President, I would suggest everything should apply to all honourable members. And if honourable members feel strongly enough, there needs to be a strengthened code when it comes to how people write and engage on social media, then I would be, of course, interested to read those thoughts. But my initial view would be that they should refer them to the appropriate Tynwald committee.
Supplementary, Ms Lord-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Chief Minister agree that perhaps before making comments somewhat lightly but actually quite seriously in this court, honourable members should be quite clear it is on what they're saying and what they're suggesting on particular matters? Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, I don't think other members should be judging other members without proper and due regard for their own actions. And, I think it is there is a need, I would suggest, for everybody to, if this is an issue, then I think that all political members need to be aware of what they're posting on social media and the manner in which they're doing it.
Move on to question 6. I call on the Honourable Member for Arbury-Castlemaine, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Chief Minister what factors have led to the creation in the last 5 years of new Deputy Chief Executive Officer roles, a new role of Executive Director of Legal Services, and any other new roles of equivalent seniority. What the cost of these roles is, and if you will make a statement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Minister to reply.
Mr. President, there are a variety of factors which could lead to the creation of a Deputy Chief Officer role, for example, a restructuring exercise or a grading review to reflect a role undertaking additional responsibilities. Turning to the role of the Executive Director of Legal Services in the Attorney General's Chambers, this post was created following a significant restructure of the Attorney General's Chambers in 2019. The role was created to provide legal oversight of the full breadth of chambers and focus on the strategic legal work associated with national level reforms. This role was also created to manage the 5 directorates of chambers.
Supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chief Minister. In June 2021, I successfully brought a Tynwald motion which stated the structure and cost of the island's government must be adjusted to more reflect the island's current needs and ability to fund it. Now we're creating more senior roles and paying them using our reserves. Does it indicate that this government is not guided by such principles? Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Minister to reply.
First of all, the member perhaps needs to give the exact evidence that he's referring to in terms of the creation of more senior roles. But I do suggest that every individual circumstance is potentially different. But also, Mr. President, departments need to have a succession plan in place. What happens when the chief officer is not present for whatever reason? Who is going to take their responsibility? It's probably a good thing in many respects to have a deputy who is shadowing the role, and it does provide a certainty of leadership.
Supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chief Minister. It's almost 5 years since the first interim CEO was appointed. What assessment has been carried out into value for money of these posts? And with regard to cost in the original question, has a figure actually been provided in terms of the cost of these new roles? Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, clearly it's going to take quite a bit of time, Mr. President, to go through each and every potential position, and not only that, to evaluate whether or not that has brought additional costs for the department. But my view, Mr. President, unless the honourable member is absolutely insistent, is that actually the value for money, the delivery of services, and the way that the department overall is approaching its responsibilities is probably more important per se than one individual specific position.
Final supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chief Minister. I do remain slightly concerned in terms of the way in which the roles are looked at in terms of their individual nature rather than the total cost that they're contributing. And I think the Chief Minister actually really needs to get a grasp of this and really consider this being a major issue in terms of the costs faced by the government. They're increasing and the revenues not increasing at the same rate, and there's lots of pressure there. So just to focus going forward, is there going to be any clarity given in terms of this rising costs and the increasing number of these key roles that potentially are just bringing together things that were done previously? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Well, I think the honourable member needs to demonstrate to me what rising costs per se that he is actually specifically referring to, because he has not, so as far as I know, presented me the evidence per se that deputy chief officer roles, where they exist, have added cost. But if he's able to do so and able to demonstrate to me that there is a significant issue in terms of these particular roles, then I will happily and gladly look at it, Mr. President, and I will of course respond to him as to the appropriateness of such and how such might be affected.
Move on to question 7. Call on the Honourable Member for Arby Castlemalu, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Treasury Minister, when a person earns more than £85 a week from an occupational pension, what percentage is deducted from any incapacity benefits, and when was this last reviewed? Thank you, Mr. President.
Call on Siobhan Kataski, Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. It should be noted that the answer I'm about to give relates to contribution-based incapacity benefit. This should not be confused with income support, which is paid on the basis of a person's incapacity for work, for which different rules apply. Where a person is entitled to incapacity benefit, having met the relevant national insurance contribution conditions and the total amount of their pension income is greater than £85 a week, their incapacity benefit is reduced by 1/2 of the pension income amount above £85. So, for example, if they have a pension income which is worth £105 a week, the amount of incapacity benefit which would otherwise be payable to them is reduced by £10 a week. For this purpose, pension income includes an occupational or works pension, a public service pension, a personal pension, and payments from permanent health insurance arranged by their employer or former employer, unless the individual has paid more than 1/2 of the contributions under the policy, and periodic payments from the UK Pension Protection Fund. Where payment of a pension is made other than weekly, rules provide for how the weekly equivalent is to be calculated. The current rules around the reduction of incapacity benefit on account of pension income were introduced in April 2001, at the same time as they were introduced in the United Kingdom. This is because incapacity benefit is within the scope of the 1977 Social Security Reciprocal Agreement with the United Kingdom, which requires that the rules are to be kept the same in the two jurisdictions. The £85 a week threshold has not changed since it was introduced in April 2001, and to the best of my knowledge, the UK Government has no imminent plans to review it. It should be noted that in the United Kingdom, contributory employment and support allowance replaced incapacity benefit for new claimants from the 27th of October 2008. However, it should be further noted that under the rules as they currently stand, the amount of contributory employment and support allowance which would otherwise be payable to an individual is reduced by 1/2 of any pension income they have over £85 a week. So we are still in line with the UK as regards this provision. Mr. President, as explained in their memorandum provided to all members by the former Department of Health and Social Security in October 2000, when provision for the reduction of incapacity benefit on account of pension income, as I've just described, was approved by this honourable court. The UK are making this change because of evidence that incapacity benefit is being used to top up the early retirement income of those with good occupational pensions. The memorandum went on to say that the Department has indications of an identical problem on the island, particularly in relation to early retirement in the public sector. Mr. President, I believe that this rationale continues to remain valid today. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister, for a really detailed answer there. When making the adjustments, is it purely based on a person's current or changes to their income levels? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. In terms of the deductions, these are calculated by the Social Security Division, and they will be in response to the person's declared income that they're getting from the pension. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister. I recognise we've got a lack of flexibility here, given our links with the UK. But in terms of the bluntness of this support, it does create issues in terms of the specific medical conditions can't be considered as part of the process. Is this something that the Minister is aware of, and how it could actually impact on certain people more than others? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Again, this is a question about incapacity benefit and pensions. It's not about individual medical conditions. So I don't see the relevance of that. However, if any of his constituents have a particular issue with their pension and incapacity benefit, I would suggest that they contact the Social Security Division. Thank you.
Move on to question 8, and I call on the Honourable Member for Arby Castlemaine, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Treasury Minister, when the Manxman will enter service, what communications has taken place between his department and the Steam Packet Company about public viewings, and what the cost of the 9th of July celebrations was. Thank you, Mr. President.
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Arrangements for the vessel commissioning were the remit of the company. I contacted the Managing Director on the 6th of July regarding the commissioning ceremony and the ability for the public to feel part of this important event. I understand that security and safety considerations meant that the logistics of a full public open day would be unmanageable. However, in lieu of this, the company planned to give away free return tickets for the maiden voyage of the Manxman to the general public via a competition. In addition, an around the island cruise will also be arranged at a date to be confirmed. The cost of the celebrations on this 9th of July were contained within the overall budget of the project. Where possible, local suppliers were used for the event, and further details and images of the vessel are available on the Steam Packet Company Facebook page and their website. Thank you.
Parliamentary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister, for that detailed answer. In terms of the correspondence with the Steam Packet, it was rather late on in the day in terms of trying to get a resolution to the challenges. Have any subsequent discussions taken place, or is there general agreement that this offer that the Minister described in his answer is going to be adequate to satisfy people? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Again, I'd like to draw the Honourable Member and the Court's attention to the role of Treasury as the shareholder of the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company. This is a private company that was bought for the benefit of the people of the Isle of Man and is run as a private company. So arrangements regarding commissioning of a new ship are down to the managing director and the board of that company. And certainly from a Treasury perspective, I don't see it to be my role to micromanage various events that they are putting on. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr Glover.
Gurumai, Dr. N. The question asked about the cost of the celebrations, not whether they were in budget. So what was the cost? And also is an investigation into what was an unlicensed firework display being conducted as well.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Again, in answer to the Honourable Member, I've made it quite clear that the costs were part of the overall budget of securing the Manxman and were part of that. The overall budget was £80 million with a contingency of £4 million, so a total budget of £84 million. The actual costs are currently being determined, so I can't give the exact amount related to the commissioning ceremony. What I can say is that the cost of the screen on Douglas Head supplied by the local company EMS was £2,150, and that included a screen and PA for Douglas Head to actually involve local people who couldn't make it down to the harbour side for obvious security reasons. In terms of the overall cost of the day, this was run by the staff of the Manxman, and so trying to delineate that from normal costs will be really quite difficult. But going forward, the main objective of the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company is to get this vessel into operation so that everyone who wants to use it can enjoy its facilities. Thank you.
On the supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. And I do remain rather concerned over this gap we have. I fully recognise the importance of the government not interfering and micromanaging, as the Minister suggested. But with something of such significance, I am concerned that the public haven't had the opportunity to go around the vessel and actually really appreciate it and see it and, enjoy the moment. And at the same time, there's that frustration that the cost of this lavish celebration of fireworks can't be discussed and can't be made public. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to impact on what the people pay for their cost of travel and what the Treasury get back as a dividend from the company. So those costs are pretty important. But also that £2,000 spent allowing the public to see things was money well spent, and actually enjoy that myself. I should perhaps declare interest there. Just in terms of that overall situation, can the Minister give an indication of what the costs were for that firework display? Or is he suggesting that we go off and do some further digging and questioning? Because it would be nice to actually place that clearly in the public realm. And with regard to the fireworks, was that an afterthought? Was that something that was done to actually appease the people, to provide something that was done to benefit the island? Because it looks to be a last-minute thing with regard to the requirements of the Fireworks Acts. 2004 not being fulfilled? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm very, very sorry to hear that the honourable member is concerned about all these aspects. Again, the Manxman is not a tourist attraction, Mr. President. It's an absolutely vital part in our connectivity. And I completely appreciate that his constituents are eager to get on board and have a look. But there will be opportunities to go around the vessel when it is when it's functioning and doing regular trips. And as I've outlined in my initial statement, there are then plans to provide free trips for the maiden voyage and round the island cruises as well. The logistics of getting lots of people on board are quite considerable. The honourable member talked about a lavish celebration. Actually, the celebration was fairly standard in terms of breaking a bottle of Manx-produced fizz against the vessel. And then a small number of guests were invited. Again, it's been said that this was a VIP reception. There were 250 guests invited to tour the Manxman initially. Really, these people who were invited included crew members, the artists who've been commissioned to make pieces for the vessel, project team members, including contractors, representatives of the travel industry, the media, local business leaders, and some of the charities and stakeholders which had helped to inform the design of the Manxman from an accessibility point of view. So I don't consider this to be a lavish event. It's very much showing the people who've taken part in the Manxman project to see the fruit of their actions. In terms of the cost of the fireworks display, which was provided by Galaxy, I understand the total cost was £15,000, just to save the honourable member more digging. In terms of the current investigation that's being done about the announcement of that, obviously I don't want to comment on that because I understand that's being carried out at the moment, but I would draw the honourable member's attention to an article that was published by Isle of Man Online on the 6th of July outlining exactly the times of those firework displays, and I think it was common knowledge for most of the people in Douglas. It certainly wasn't an afterthought, and I think the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company and the crew should be commended on the way that they brought the people along with the voyage from South Korea to our island, and now the work that they're doing to make this vessel ship-shape for the travelling public. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to question 9, I'd just like to remind honourable members of Standing Order 3.32. If someone says something which another member wishes to object, under that standing order they must rise and indicate that they wish to say something at the time and object. So, honourable members, just bear that in mind in future. So we now move on to question 9. I call on the honourable member for Rushen, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture what assessment of and provisions for technical level qualifications there has been and when these will become available.
I call on Siobhan Inzi, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Technical level qualifications are an alternative to A-levels, apprenticeships and other 16 to 19 courses. Technical level qualifications are not currently accessible for non-UK jurisdictions, as completion of these are currently conferred by the UK Government. University College Isle of Man has been in recent discussions with Pearson Edexcel, together with Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the Channel Islands, and Pearson have agreed to continue to develop BTEC programmes, having acknowledged there is sufficient demand across the sector. This is important to note, given that the very large majority of technical level qualifications have yet to commence and 4 have been delayed, with pilot findings suggesting lower pass and retention rates when compared to BTEC courses. The Department does recognise that the UK qualification landscape is changing, and the University College Isle of Man works closely with its awarding bodies to ensure it is well prepared for these developments. In addition, the Department will work with the UK Government to attempt to remove barriers to delivering technical level qualifications where it is deemed that there is a local need. In order to be prepared for changes in qualifications such as technical level qualifications, which include a greater focus on employability and work placement, University College Isle of Man will seek to widen access to work experience, live projects and employer visits. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for that answer. I wonder if she could perhaps elucidate what conversations have taken place to remove the barriers to technical level qualifications here, and I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that the ultimate goal of our education system is equipping young people with the skills and qualifications they need, and many company directors on the Isle of Man have expressed interest in T-levels to help address and train the next generation of our workforce.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. UCM undertakes an annual cycle of curriculum review and development, and this is in line with our strategy. And this is in consultation with all government agencies, employers and stakeholders and awarding bodies. Thank you, Mr President.
Move on to question 10. I call on the Honourable Member for Albury Castlemaine, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture whether her department's schools have been able to offer work experience placements this year to all Year 10 students or B, all Year 11 students. Thank you, Mr President.
Call on Shaveshok, Inzi, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Traditionally, the Year 10 Work Experience programme has comprised of a combination of department-sourced and self-placed work experience opportunities. In 2021, post-pandemic, an informal consultation with employers already engaged in the Work Experience programme highlighted that the employment landscape had changed significantly. These employers, whilst wanting to support work-based experiences, were unable to offer the quantity of placements as they had pre-pandemic. Changes to business structure, altered work patterns, remote and hybrid working have significantly reduced the number of appropriate placements employers are able to offer to Year 10 or 11 students, meaning it is not possible to offer work experience to all students in either year group. This reduction in placement offers, alongside the challenges faced across the education system at this time, prompted a review into the programme. Since 2022, the Department have been working proactively with employers, forming relationships that allow the needs of students to be balanced with a realistic offer of safe, well-planned and enriching work experience offers from the employers. Further communications with employers more recently have highlighted the effects of the cost of living crisis, which has also impacted the ability to support learners in a workplace environment, and employers have expressed a preference for supporting learners in a more structured, career-focused manner. For the last 18 months, the Department has been working with the employers to facilitate placements based on student need, and several pilot programmes have been carried out, including a focus on students who require additional support or those who are expecting to leave education and take up employment at the end of Year 11 or at the end of Year 13. Each school maintains their own careers and employability offer, which is supported by the Department and the Careers Service. Schools and the Department have arranged and supported as many placements as possible in the last academic year, given the current restrictions, and where this has not been possible, have provided additional employability support in the form of career talks, employer sessions, skills-focused learning and supplementary careers guidance. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister. I recognise there are definite challenges here, but how innovative has the Department been in identifying local work experience placements? I don't recall seeing any calls for local businesses to assist with this. Was the Department of Enterprise and the Chamber of Commerce actually spoken to before parents were informed that this won't be going ahead? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. The recruitment of the Careers Advisor Employer Link post in 2022 meant that the Department were able to build relationships with local organisations and employers to further understand the employment landscape and possible engagement with education, including the offer of the work experience placements. The database of employers has been updated, and many employers have signed up to the Inspiring the Future website to express their offer of engagement. However, a lot of employers are unable to offer the traditional week-long placements to younger students. The Employer Link role has been working to build up relationships, utilising LinkedIn, making direct contact and attending relevant events, all of which have received good responses from local organisations and individuals, many of whom have successfully engaged with our schools in the form of career talks and visits. Both the Department for Enterprise and the Chamber of Commerce were kept aware of the changes to the work experience programme post-COVID, and discussions were had around this and considerations going forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Moores.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister. I'm slightly confused about the answer in terms of references made to the the existing database and how that's kind of shrunk as a consequence of COVID, which I fully accept. Reference is also made in terms of looking for new opportunities through LinkedIn. In terms of looking for those new opportunities, how proactive have we been? And the Minister's made reference to alternative activities. Has the Department been able to support schools in the provision of these alternative activities? And given the Department's previous role in this area, how proactive have they been in updating, supporting and actually monitoring what goes on in these areas? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Schools have been able to offer various activities to our students around careers and employability, supported by the Department's career team. Careers team meet regularly with the careers and employability leads in each school to discuss provision of support and ongoing discussion around work experience, and work experience forms part of these meetings. Obviously, each individual school is the data controller and holds the information with regards to placements, but I am happy to identify that information and circulate to honourable members. With regards to the database, obviously it did shrink, and the honourable member might not be aware, but we do have a skills board in place now that is working across the Department for Enterprise and the Department of Education, which has members from the Chamber of Commerce on that. And certainly placements for students is a topic that has been briefly discussed, but it will be continued.
Final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister. It was quite interesting that BBC Business actually did a big push on work experience about 3 weeks ago and really did kind of raise the interest and say how important it was. I'm slightly concerned on the other hand, we're actually moving away from it. We're looking at alternatives. Is my interpretation correct? Are we going to go back to what it was like in 2019 and earlier? Are we going to actually see a full return to all students in either year 10 or 11 actually benefiting from work experience, or is that no longer seen as possible by the Minister? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, I haven't had time to look at the BBC to see what the article is the honourable member's talking about, but with the change in landscape, and obviously being in education, you'll understand this, within education and the workplace, perhaps it is time to rework the work experience model and ensure that we look more at bespoke pathways and opportunities for all our students.
Move on to question 11. I call on the honourable member for Albury Castanello, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture if she will provide an update on progress with the review of the relationships and sex education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Department anticipate the final report of Part 2 of the independent investigation by the 21st of July, which has previously been reported in this and the other honourable place. The Department will then review the content and outcomes and consider the next steps. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister, for that very clear answer. I'm slightly concerned it'll come out again at 25 past 4 or later, but that's something I will deal with at the end of the week. I'm also concerned in terms of that stage 2 complete. In terms of going forward, when does the Minister expect the full report to be completed? Is there any possibility that will be completed before the start of the next academic year? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do feel that I need to reiterate the importance with regards to the terms of reference and the purpose of writing a terms of reference for any investigation. And the honourable member is correct that Part 2 will be complete by the end of the school term, which is the 21st of July, and Phase 3 will then consider, in light of any of the outcome of the Phase 2, any changes that may be required. And it's always been recognised by the department and by the current investigative team that Phase 3 would require specialist expertise. However, until Phase 2 of the report is seen, we wouldn't wish to second-guess the outcome. Whilst this process has taken time, it's important that the process is thorough and all views of stakeholders is heard and taken into consideration. With regards to our PHSE curriculum, that will be timetabled from September, and as the honourable member will know, at this point I would expect that non-RSE elements will be delivered, which will allow us to have that consideration of the next steps and further work required following Phase 2. However, the PSHE programme will be delivered and continued in our schools in September.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Miss, for the level of clarity there. It does raise questions though, in terms of what will be delivered in September. The Minister did give an exception. I didn't quite hear it. So will the sex education aspect not be included in the delivery from September onwards? And in terms of what will be taught, has that been delivered to the schools? Have the schools now got clarity in terms of what will be delivered from the start of term? And just in terms of that material, is that being made available on the department's website so everyone can actually access it and see it? And the final bit of this question is, in terms of that material, where's it actually come from? Who's actually written this material in terms of what will be delivered in September? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I think the honourable member's getting a little bit confused between the PSHE programme, which is in our schools, and it's not just about the RSE element. So with regards to the PSHE, that will be timetabled, and obviously the schools are best placed to say what will be delivered in that. But with regards to some of the comments that the honourable members made, Phase 2 is going to provide the views of parents and the views of the professionals. So a decision on Phase 3 can then be made, taken into account the outcome of the Phase 2, Part 2, of the investigation. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Lauder.
Could I lecture in? The Minister said that she expects the Phase 2 report to be completed by Friday. Will she confirm whether or not she's yet received a draft of that report, and whether she will commit to publishing the Phase 2 report next week?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I have not seen any draft. No members in my department have seen a draft. Certainly, it is quite a tight timescale for the investigators to complete by Friday, but it's always been the intention to have that complete by Friday, and we have always committed on completion of the review that we would publish.
Next week.
This week.
Sorry, Mr President. Obviously, Part 2 is only one element of the whole review. However, I will speak to the department as to what and when can be published, but the review of Part 2 was appropriate to have delivered before the end of the school term, and that's what we've committed to, is to make sure that report is delivered to the department by the 21st of July, and then obviously we will have to look at that to make sure that we can move into Part 3.
Final supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Just 2 points of clarity, please. With regard to RSE teaching, that won't start again in September. Is that correct? And also in terms of the adaptation of the team, how soon after Friday, when Stage 2 is released, do we expect to get an update in terms of who will be going forward as part of the enlarged team or advising the team? And in terms of the requirements of Stage 3, does the Minister expect that to change in any respects in light of what comes up from Stage 2 report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the Honourable Member is trying to preempt an independent investigation. As I've said, we will not be receiving the report until Friday, the 21st of July, and obviously what the content is, I have not seen sight of as yet. But with regards to RSE, it's currently paused and will remain paused until myself and the department members are satisfied that what will be delivered involving professionals to make sure it is the right curriculum. This curriculum was implemented in 2020, I believe, and certainly it's only come to light some concerns. So we are reviewing it all, and we'll make sure that it's appropriate and that it's well communicated what will be delivered in our schools once we've got to the end of Phase 3, if Phase 3 is required.
Move on to question 12 and a call on the Honourable Member for Douglas East, Ms Farragut.
I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether his department plans to publish a post-project review of the promenade upgrade to include details of any delays, errors and the reasons for the decision to descope the completion of the tram tracks.
Call on Siobhan Buntroglas to reply.
Mr. President, it is intended that a post-project review will be held subject to support from all parties. In terms of the descoping of the tram tracks, in simple terms, the decision was taken at the point in time to try and accelerate completion of the promenade project after the first COVID lockdown. And the funding that was available at the time went to pay for the cost of the accelerated agreement.
Supplementary, Ms Farragut.
Could I ask the Minister, has any assessment been undertaken by the DOI on what the impact is of the incomplete project on the community, stakeholders and the overall development of the area? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Not that I'm specifically aware in relation to the tram tracks.
Supplementary, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. The primary reason publicly stated at the time for descoping the completion, as the Chief Minister alluded to, was that the necessity to get the promenade clear of building works for the 2021 season. But later it was confirmed that the budget was used up. Who authorised the descoping without the need to return to this honourable court? Was it the Minister at the time, I think that was Minister Harmer, or was it him as Treasury Minister during that time? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
I'll have to respond to the honourable member on that because she's asked me a question that goes back a couple of years, and in terms of I'm fairly certain, Mr. President, it was actually a collective decision by the Council of Ministers at that particular time, but I can confirm that in terms of its accuracy.
Supplementary, Ms Farragut.
In a previous response, the Minister stated that the completion of the tram tracks are part of the sister review's remit. This has been a Tynwald decision more than once. Does the Minister accept that this looks a lot like sending decisions to review until we get a predetermined response? Could he explain, please, why a Tynwald decision has been taken to external review, when surely it would have been more appropriate to bring it back to Tynwald with the information about what exactly the barriers are from the Department's point of view? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
I think finding the funding is certainly a barrier, and the honourable member will know how much pressure government finances are currently under. I do think it is important that we do look at this holistically and that we include the horse trams alongside the review of the steam railway and the electric railway.
Supplementary, Ms Farragut.
The promenade upgrade as a capital project was a really big issue when I canvassed. I still receive regular correspondence about it. Two of the drivers are wanting to understand what happened and wanting reassurance that steps are being taken to ensure it doesn't happen again. Could the Minister confirm, even if he's not willing to share them at this point, whether there are any identified lessons learned from this project that can be applied to future capital projects to improve planning, execution and timely completion? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Well, I'm sure there will be some appropriate findings in terms of potentially where there were potential failings in regard to the promenade. But of course, we have set up now a major projects unit to try and strengthen the government's approach to major capital projects.
Supplementary, Mr Crookall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Chief Minister, on behalf of the Department, commit the Department to reveal exactly what the true cost, the whole cost of the PROM project was, please?
Minister to reply.
Absolutely. Of course, once we have that finalised figure, I understand there are still one or two bits and pieces of negotiation on costs still being undertaken. As soon as we've got that figure, I'm happy to ensure that that is publicly detailed.
Supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Chief Minister, acting as Infrastructure Minister, agree with me that the final figure of 25,700,000 was included in the Pink Book this year?
Minister to reply.
Yes, that figure was in the Pink Book.
Supplementary, Ms. Farragut.
With regards to disregarding a Tynwald decision and de-scoping the tram tracks, I think this has a lot of potential to impact government legitimacy and public trust. Does the Minister accept that? And with regards to publishing details of delays and errors, does he view this as a matter of public interest that he wishes to address? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
I think it's a slightly more complex matter, Mr. President. I think this is a matter both of financing, government priorities and a holistic approach towards our heritage railways. And I think that many of these factors can come together once we've got the outcome of the reviews that are being undertaken at the moment into our heritage railways.
Final supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to ask the Chief Minister if he would like to go all the way in terms of... Would he like to see them restored and reinstalled to the sea terminal? And does it depend, as a sister review revisiting a Tynwald decision, is it all down to what this review says in terms of the economic viability with or without completing the line to the sea terminal? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Not this morning, Mr. President.
We move on to question 13. I call on the Honourable Member for Rush and Lauder.
Good night, and I'd like to congratulate the Infrastructure Minister on his new appointment. I think he's only got Department of Home Affairs and DEFRA for the full set now. If I ask him, will he commit to the long-term future operation under government ownership of the full length of the Isle of Man Steam Railway, the Manx Electric Railway, the Snaefell Mountain Railway and the Douglas Bay Horse Tramway? If he'll explain the purpose of the sister review and how the public can engage with the process.
Call on Siobhan Buntroglus to reply.
Mr. President, the purpose of the sister review is stated in the terms of reference which has been widely publicised. The review and economic impact assessment has been commissioned to answer key questions about our heritage railways, specifically whether they are being governed, operated and organised optimally and from the right place in the Department of Infrastructure, and also to estimate how the benefits of operational costs compare. A public consultation was launched on the 3rd of July and will be open until the 13th of August. It has received, Mr. President, over 2,000 responses so far. I would encourage as many people as possible, regardless of which side of the fence you sit on, to engage with this consultation. In addition to the public consultation, the Sistra team are here on the island today to meet with volunteer groups and enthusiasts, local authority representatives and employee representatives to obtain their views and feedback on what the Heritage Rail Network means to them and their organisations. Mr. President, we have engaged these consultants to help us get an independent view of this service, and I hope that their ultimate recommendations will help us decide on what basis we can secure the future of the Heritage Railways.
Supplementary Lord.
I'd like to thank the Chief Minister and the Infrastructure Minister for his comprehensive answer to the second and third parts of my question. The first part of the question was, will he commit to the long-term future operation under government ownership, not necessarily government direct operation, but government ownership of the full length of the Isle of Man Steam Railway, the Manx Electric Railway, the Snaefell Mountain Railway and the Douglas Bay Horse Tramway?
Minister to reply.
And as I have said, Mr. President, I think it's important that we get the outcome from the work that's being undertaken at the moment, so that we can all work together to ensure that we have a sustainable long-term future for the heritage railways that we operate.
Supplementary Lord.
Good man. Given that the Chief Minister has not been able to give an unequivocal guarantee that he will commit to the long-term future operation under government ownership, the full length of those railways, to what extent is the railway actually under threat?
Minister to reply.
Well, I think, Mr. President, there's a lot of speculation being created this morning, and I think a lot of it's actually
put it to bed then.
I appreciate when you're taking forward these sorts of reviews with potentially an eye on some form of reform, then does create some uncertainty. I think there's opportunity, though, Mr. President, and I think that's what we should be looking for from this, is the opportunity to put our heritage railways onto a sustainable footing for the future. And it's no secret there are alternative structures that might be put around our heritage railways that would help and encourage those who support the railways to be more included in their future, and also provide potential additional resources for those heritage railways to be successful into the future.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm starting to agree with Mr. Speaker. I think this is probably the biggest threat to our heritage railway since the 1970s. And I would like to ask the Chief Minister, considering the Beeman's review of the DOI that was undertaken, I think it was published 2 years ago now, that recommended a Chief Operating Officer be put in place, and that the various constituent parts of the DOI, rather than being broken up, got to concentrate on their operation while the department looked at the policy and oversight governance and had a capital projects unit, which I also don't think has materialised yet. But given the review from 2 years ago, what has been action from that report to support the operation of the railways, or are they just going back to yet another consultation, another consultant's review until they get the answer that they want, which seems to be a reduction in the railways? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Well, again, I mean, I think the honourable member's jumping to a conclusion and spreading a false alarm that is not that has never been stated. I think all the government is doing, quite sensibly, in my view, is looking at the actual cost, which is very hard to identify at times, of the running of the heritage railways. That will in turn provide a clarity of what is needed to ensure what is required in terms of financial support to run the railways, and then vis-a-vis one can determine under what sort of structure is best put in place in order to ensure that that level of funding is available. And that is the purpose. I see this as opportunity, and we should look at the pressures that are being faced in terms of funding across the board in terms of government services, and the Treasury Minister clearly has already outlined in his previous budget some of those pressures, and we know that funds are tight as if they already have not been in the past. But the critical point is, I think, in identifying with some real accuracy the true cost, one can then perhaps work forward to identify the opportunities that exist to ensure that, as I said, we can put the whole of the heritage railways onto a sustainable footing.
Supplementary, Lauder.
And I don't think there's anything in what I've asked so far that means that the structure couldn't be changed. But the Chief Minister has said that a false alarm is being spread. So can I ask him to minimise the uncertainty and ask him which parts of this he will not guarantee? Will he not guarantee the future long-term operation? Will he not guarantee government ownership? Or will he not guarantee those railways operating the full length of their network?
Minister to reply.
What I will guarantee, Mr. President, is that the honourable member will be amongst the first to have sight of the relevant reports. And I can also guarantee, Mr. President, that Tynwald will be fully engaged in any proposals that would be brought forward. But as I have suggested to you, we're undertaking a very broad consultation here. I've already explained that the consultants that we've employed to help us do all the analysis are engaging across the community. And I am sure that when we come to analyse the facts, we will also have a clarity around the options that are available to us and the opportunities. I can't stress this enough, Mr. President. There could be some real opportunities to do something to put the heritage railways well into the future.
Supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that the terms of reference are very explicit in this fact? Closing lines is one possibility, but There's also the possibility to rearrange the schedule and to even reduce the schedule, which is another possibility that the consultants have been asked to consider. Would the Chief Minister also agree with me that the terms of reference are very explicit, that government ownership could be taken forward in different ways through using foundations and trusts outside government to maximise the opportunity for people who would give money to foundations and trusts but wouldn't give it to the Isle of Man government voluntarily, can actually influence the future of the railways. Finally, would the Chief Minister agree with me that it's important to have facts about reform in the Department of Infrastructure on the table? And so would he confirm that the Major Projects Board was actually created and in concept as announced by the Treasury Minister and myself in the budget in 2023 over the winter of 2022-23, and that the Department of Infrastructure has actually taken forward most of the reforms advocated by Beamans?
Minister to reply.
Well, I think what I will agree with is that facts are important in terms of what's being asked for from the consultants in this particular moment in time, and it is absolutely vital that not only just in Heritage Rail, but in other areas across government as well, we get a proper and full understanding of the costs, because it's only by doing so that I believe we can come up with the right solutions. And the Honourable Member talks about some of the possibilities vis-à-vis some of the opportunities potentially where funding may be increased through different structures that are associated with the heritage railways. And I think it's important, again, that we do be mindful of our language. There's lots of possibilities, some of which people will interpret as negative, some of which people will interpret as positive. I think the important thing is we carry out the factual analysis, and that factual analysis and the opportunities that come with that, or at least the recognition of the opportunities, is properly discussed and evaluated. And as I said, and I can't help but repeat myself, Mr. President, to put the operation of the Heritage Railways onto a sustainable basis for the future.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to thank the previous Minister for facilitating a meeting with Sistra consultants that I actually took part in this morning with a number of representatives from various heritage rail groups. Unfortunately, it coincided with this session, so I wasn't able to stay there very long. But my difficulty is, as highlighted by Honourable Member Mr Thomas, that the very specific detailed terms of reference given to the reviewers don't seem to match with the Chief Minister's comments today. Is everything on the table? Will the railways be retained in the connectivity that we currently have? And also, does he feel that the online survey form with 4 simple questions actually leads into the review? What sort of review? It causes confusion and concern that there is everything is on the table, including a reduction in the railways, potentially, and a reduction in the operation, and potentially a system, while we all think and could support going forward in a more economic way in terms of the operation, it's that fundamental point that the Isle of Man will retain the railways. And I don't get an overwhelming sense that the Chief Minister feels that that is important. And I'd like to ask him if he thinks it is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
No, I haven't said it's not important in terms of our heritage railways. What I have said is important, though, is that we do a proper analysis, because it's only by undertaking that analysis that we're going to actually be able to start reaching and drawing the proper conclusions in terms of how these elements of our budget will be apportioned, and to what type of structure would be best apportioned to, and how and what type of operating structure around the railways may actually lead to the railways, as I said, being put on a sustainable basis, because there are other structures around that may allow an organisation to raise public funds without having to consistently come to the Treasury for taxation and subscriptions that are paid centrally.
Supplementary, Mr. Glover.
And so much analysis going on. Are we in danger, though, in this particular case, of knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing?
Yeah.
Minister to reply.
Well, I absolutely have to reject that rather sort of perhaps inappropriate remark, because I don't think that is the case. I think this is responsible politics and responsible governance. I realise how fond people are of the heritage railways and what significance they play in our heritage indeed. This is merely a responsible government ensuring that it absolutely understands the cost and wants to put the heritage railways onto a sustainable basis for the future, and we should work together to identify the opportunities for that, but we can only do that if we have the true facts put out in front of us.
Final supplementary, Lord.
Good my answer in. And the Minister has said repeatedly that he wants to put this on a sustainable footing, and of course closing the entire network is pretty sustainable. So what I ask him is, what minimum guarantees is he able to give this court? What minimum guarantees will he give over the future of heritage rail on our island?
Minister to reply.
Well, what I will guarantee to the Speaker is that we will be able to debate how the heritage railways will work in the future of this island, and I am confident the heritage railways will continue to be a part of the offering that is contained within the overall offering, if you like, from a tourist and heritage perspective.
Move on to question 14. I call on the Honourable Member for Arbury Castelmaloo, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure how many hours of training the 4 trainee air traffic controllers still require in order to be fully qualified, and how much scheduled training time is available each week. Thank you.
To reply. Minister for Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Mr President, it is not possible, nor would it be appropriate, to detail in this place accurate numbers of training hours each individual air traffic controller trainee requires to become fully qualified. Even if this was possible and appropriate, it would be too simplistic to hope to take these numbers and divide it by the number of training hours available per week in the hopes of calculating the number of weeks until all become fully qualified. In general terms, the Air Traffic Control Officer Unit Training Plan allocates minimum, target and maximum hours for each stage of a ratings unit endorsement course. For aerodrome control, the target hours are 200. For approach control, when trained combined as approach surveillance and approach procedural, which is normally the case at the Isle of Man Airport, the target hours are 260. These quoted hours are effective training hours working towards specified objectives described within the unit training plan, which means that not every hour a trainee sits in the seat can be counted. This is because training takes place during live operations, which are subject to changes in traffic density and complexity, as well as a range of other factors which can affect training value. If the Honourable Member's question was intended to ask when it is anticipated the current trainees will all be fully validated, this again is difficult to predict accurately, given the current mix of trainees includes both a student ATCO and an experienced ATCOs with different backgrounds. I would simply therefore reiterate previous statements that student ATCOs can take on average 3 to 4 years to become fully qualified and endorsed, while experienced ATCOs, depending on experience and ratings held, should take on average up to 24 months to become fully endorsed.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Infrastructure Minister, Chief Minister, and thank you, Mr President. That leaves me really quite concerned. First point of clarity I need is the figures given for 200 hours and 260 hours. So is that a total of 460 hours required to get the 2 elements of training? Because it's been suggested there are only 2 trainers at the airport who are providing training as part of this programme. And in terms of a date in August being possible to actually get the required number of people trained and working, is that an impossibility given these large numbers and limited numbers of trainers? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
I think, Mr President, I have highlighted in my answer this is just not a simplistic matter and requires live training to be given as part of the overall qualification process. And on that basis, it does not mean that every hour spent will count necessarily towards their qualification. I have given the basis that in terms of the likelihood of when we're likely to see people fully qualified. I've also, and the Minister before me, in fact, has offered the reassurance that we expect to see, with some confidence, improvements this August, literally in a few weeks' time, with regards to the availability of air traffic control officers.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister. The last line was reassuring that we're still moving towards August being that date that we can actually achieve real change. It is concerning, though, that the figures are not being broken down when you've actually just got two clear figures in terms of the amount of training required and the number of training hours that are provided. One element of reassurance is perhaps going to come from the simulator that has been mentioned by the former Minister. This is something that went to Treasury 4 years ago when I was in DOI and was actually rejected. Is that piece of equipment required to ensure that the 18-month target is achieved? And given that the Minister was Minister for Treasury at that time, have the concerns that were raised at that time been resolved? And is there the real possibility that this bid will succeed and we'll actually get this simulator, as the former Minister was suggesting, would help us with the future problems? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Well, I think what I want to say to the honourable member is just to repeat, training capacity is not solely a function of the number of hours available to train. Air traffic controllers at the Isle of Man Airport provide services from only 2 operational positions. And fully qualified air traffic controllers, including those who are instructors providing the training, are themselves required to maintain a minimum number of solo controlling hours per month in each rating held to keep their endorsements valid. In practice, this itself restricts the number of hours per week available for training, without also factoring in the availability of trainees and instructors on their roster cycles. Mr President, we have set out a short, medium and longer term plan to ensure that we have 18 fully qualified air traffic controllers available to us in the future. And I think this is what we need to focus on in the immediate future. And as I said, with some confidence that we will start to see improvements in terms of the availability of air traffic controllers from August this year. And of course, we will continue to look at what else can be done to practically increase the training capacity of the air traffic control unit.
Supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that it's a pretty difficult issue managing the roster for air traffic controllers in the Tower, and it's not for Tynwald members to actually become instant experts and instant managers of that? But also, would you join with me in thanking all the staff for going above and beyond, thinking about rosters, getting regulatory approval such that we should be able to make some very good announcements right at the beginning of August?
Minister to reply.
I absolutely will join him in expressing deep gratitude to the air traffic controllers who have been operating at minimum staffing levels and have given up a lot to ensure that the airport has continued to run effectively. It's certainly not been their fault that these current issues have been experienced, and I'm delighted, as I said, that we very shortly expect to announce an improvement in the service levels, and that will be a continuous improvement as we start to bring more and more air traffic controllers online. And of course, we need to continue to ensure that we provide resilience to that service, and we need to continue to ensure how that can be practically done.
Hear, hear.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister. In many ways, the answers have been reassuring, and hopefully they will come true. My concern remains, though, in terms of the number of trainers' hours available, we've still not got the clarity on it. And in terms of the start of August, is the Minister able to give us an indication of how many additional air traffic controllers will be on the roster? Because we haven't got clarity whether there'll be 1, 2, 3, possibly all 4 of them. So that reassurance would hopefully allow us to sleep better in the evenings. Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Well, I will leave that to the professionals at the airport to make the relevant announcements and to declare the operational flying times for the airport. But what I want to say really to honourable members and indeed to the public is we have short and medium and long-term plans to ensure that our staffing levels in terms of the air traffic controllers are at such a point where we are operating the airport as efficiently and effective as we possibly can. Clearly, even though recorrecting the position with air traffic controllers will give us a lot of comfort in terms of operating hours and aircraft able to travel to and from the island out of schedule, it's still nevertheless, there is, as honourable members will know, still significant problems in terms of air travel post-COVID. There are a number of issues that have been clearly highlighted in the National Express that extend far beyond our national boundaries. But we are going to also continue now to look and work as quickly as possible in terms of our overall strategic air services management and make sure that we are doing the very best we can to ensure that airlines are willing to fly to the island and that we have got the best possible facilities for them to do so.
Supplementary, Mrs. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just picking up on the previous question by Mr. Morehouse, and also for the purposes of Hansard, if the Chief Minister doesn't know the answer today, could he confirm if in his previous role as Treasury Minister, does he recall a budget request for a simulator? And if there was one, was it obviously declined? Thank you. And what were the reasons? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister to reply.
Well, I don't specifically recall it. I have in my notes that a business case was proposed by the department to procure a simulator, but this was not taken forward. It's not actually clear whether that was presented to Treasury or not, but I will find out and clarify that point to the honourable member.
Final supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that in actual fact, back in 2018, 2019, 2020, quite a number of people were taken on to this very difficult profession, this very difficult qualification, but COVID hasn't made it easy for those people. For instance, the annual training courses across were unavailable for a while, and also just the basic principles of training during COVID was pretty difficult. So would the Chief Minister agree with me that we need to have some understanding rather than blame in respect of the difficulties in that period?
Minister to reply.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I mean, I don't think it's anything less than stating the obvious that COVID had a massive impact on the air travel industry, and that includes the training of air traffic controllers who do require live training. And again, it's of no comfort, of course, but across the world, I would suggest there is a shortage of air traffic controllers, and again, one only needs to read the international press to see the impact that is having in many other countries. Nevertheless, our objective, of course, is to make sure our airport is functioning as efficiently as possible. That's why we've got our short, medium and term plan. That's why things are going to improve this August, and we're going to keep ensuring that they are improving throughout the next 2 years as we bring up to 18 air traffic controllers operational and able to provide us substantial resilience into the future.
On to question 15, a call on the Honourable Member for Arbury-Castlemalu, Mr. Glover.
Guru Mayadektaran, I'd like to ask the Chair of the Manx Utilities Authority what plans exist for the introduction of water meters and if he'll make a statement.
Call on a Carlac Bun Shaveshan Vannan, Chair of the Manx Utilities Authority, to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members will be aware that Manx Utilities has an objective under the Island Plan to produce a report to support water resilience on the Isle of Man. A water resources management plan was published on 30th of June 2023 and is available on the Manx Utilities website. Although not a requirement on the island, a water resources management plan is a statutory requirement for water companies throughout the British Isles and many other parts of the world. Our plan highlights that over the next 40 years, without positive action, the island will very likely face challenges with raw water stocks, and this could be exacerbated by the effects of climate change. The need to reduce water demand is a fundamental element of our water resources management plan, and this must be a focus of our efforts as it has the potential to greatly increase our island's water stock resilience. Reducing demand will also protect and enhance our island environment. The current water resources management plan sets out our strategy whilst the 40-year plan is completed. This plan should be available in the spring next year. This will include the consideration of the potential benefits of water metering in some form. Jurisdictions that have compulsory water meters have lowered their customer demand. Studies undertaken elsewhere have shown that demand can be reduced by up to 20% by the use of charging for water by quantity rather than solely by rateable value. We currently have a number of commercial water meters, but we do not have domestic water meters. Before we consider the likes of a new reservoir or a water desalination plant, we need to reduce demand. This could ultimately include compulsory fitting of water meters, but this would need for us to develop a charging tariff and system to support the billing process. The introduction of water meters into the new builds could be a good start to the process, but much work would be needed in advance of that. Manx Utilities' own drive towards reducing demand includes an enhanced regime of ageing water main replacement, the introduction of pressure management schemes, and focused attention on identifying leaks, either in our own network or the private premises. In summary, Mr. President, we as an island have a high demand for water, and therefore it is absolutely essential that we consider all options available to us to ensure that our water resilience is maintained. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Glover.
And thank you to the Chair for a very comprehensive reply to that question. If water meters are to come in, there's obviously going to, and I just want to see if any work has taken place there yet, water rates that we pay currently in our rate bill, how's that going to work with then a metered system as well?
Chair to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I said, there would have to be an awful lot of work done with regards to changing over from water rates to water meters, and that work hasn't begun yet in any way, shape or form.
Supplementary, Mr. Glover.
The Chair touched on it, but I mean, one way for us to have more resilience in our water supply is to fix the leaks we currently have in the system, which I note the report says are 10% higher than currently in the UK when measuring it per property per day.
Chair to reply.
Yes, Mr. President. Again, as I said, Manx Utilities' own drive towards reducing demand includes an enhanced regime of ageing water mains replacement. We're absolutely aware that there's a lot of water does leak out from the pipes, and we are doing our best to replace those as soon as we can.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the water meters cost a similar amount to buy and install to the electricity meters that are currently being installed? Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair to reply.
Mr. President, I've no idea on that figure at the moment, and it's likely to change considerably between now and when Tynwald make that decision, if it made that decision, as to what those costs would be. So I've got no idea.
Supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me help the Chair then, please. Does the Chair recall that back in 2010, when the Council of Ministers looked at water meters, that the estimated cost of water meters was £16 million in 2010, and that would put 17% on the costs for no reason, because it was capital costs, and so therefore this prospect was absolutely rejected. What's changed since 2010? Also since 2014, when the Rates Committee of Tynwald looked at this, and also since the MUA pricing strategy in 2018, when water meters were rejected for domestic properties.
Chair to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I vaguely remember that figure of 15, 16, 17 million that the honourable members reminded me of. As I said, this is very early days for the department, for the utility at the moment, and regarding costs and which way we go. And at the end of the day, as I said, ultimately it will be a Tynwald decision as to whether we go down this route or not.
Move on to question 16. A call on the Honourable Member for Garth. Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture when her department will review school meals.
Call on Sheveshok, Inzi, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Department of Education, Sport and Culture are currently reviewing primary school meals in collaboration with the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs. Christian, in her role as a member of the department. It's important to clarify that primary school meals are centralised under the primary school catering team, and there is consistency across all of our island's primary schools. Primary schools follow the UK Government's school food standards, which provide guidance and recommendations on portion size, cooking techniques, limits on food items from each category, so for example how much dairy, protein and carbohydrates should be served and how often. Where possible, fresh local produce is used in recipes with a small amount of pre-made frozen items that are school meal compliant. For example, items which are low in salt, sugar and fat that are child-friendly portion sizes. There is no mechanically reformed meat used and there are no deep-fried items. The primary school menus consist of a 3-week cycle and include a variety of protein items, fish, chicken, pork, ham and beef, vegetarian and vegan-friendly items, to give choices of other sources of protein in the diet. These items are served with the daily carbohydrates such as potatoes, pasta and rice. A selection of vegetables, salad bars and fruit platters are also available daily in every primary school. Primary catering team have met with other government department representatives and food suppliers and along with feedback received from the school cooks have discussed and developed the new school menus for the coming academic year. All secondary school catering managers work independently from each other and the individual schools decide on the menu choices. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank the Minister for her answer. She will be aware that the written answer she gave informing me and honourable members how much ultra-processed food content in school meals is without any narrative around how much of it is good, bad, processed, frozen or sort of convenience food style meals, ingredients served, is what's behind this question. And she said her department is taking a review of school meals. When will that review be completed? Will it include a reduction in ultra-processed food in school meals, particularly in the primary schools? And what is the purpose of the review? How much, she also mentioned there was fresh local produce. How much as a percentage can she say is local produce? Because looking at the just published menu for the autumn term in primary schools, there still seems a lot of cake and pudding, sweet things, and pretty much limited to a couple of vegetarian options or a lot of baked potato for vegetarians. So I wonder what form is her review taking, what is its purpose, when will it be concluded, and what impact will it have on school meals?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Obviously, in the other honourable place, this topic was discussed, and that's when I said I would launch a review into it. And that is because I feel that it's the right time to do a complete review of school meals and rebranding. And my honourable colleague for Douglas South and Department Member Mrs Christian has offered to do that review. But the use of ultra-processed foods is a national issue. According to the Food Research Collaboration Responsibility for Food Policy within English Government, it involves 16 different departments. And I do have that detail here of all the government departments that are involved in creating food policy, and I'm happy to circulate that. Following a study, the Soil Association have produced a document called Ultra-Processed Foods, the Case for Rebalancing. In this document, it states that a 2017 study into 19 European countries found that the purchasing of ultra-processed foods in the UK is the highest in Europe, with 50.7% of the UK's shopping basket being made up of ultra-processed foods. And I'll also share that document. I am aware that the UK government is looking into this, and as I say, I'll circulate the chart with all the government departments that are involved. With regards to the quantity of fresh produce that is utilised in our schools, I don't actually have the quantity, but I am aware that our schools do use local produce from local suppliers on a daily basis. Whether that is actually sourced from the ground in the Isle of Man, I don't think we'd probably be able to cope with that when we're delivering a school meals, but I'm happy to circulate that figure. The Honourable Member may be aware, but we don't have cooking facilities in all of our schools, and that was a decision made by previous governments, and therefore the balance of the numbers of schools, and certainly all of our secondary schools, do have cooking facilities to be able to do food on site, but not all of our sites do have that, and we have demi kitchens available. However, I did look into this to see what would it cost to upgrade the demi kitchens into full cook facilities, and that would be a cost of 1.2 million. So on average, it would cost approximately 65,000 per school. So as you can see, these kitchens have been taken out. There is significant cost to take them back. But I think it's really important that this review is carried out. I'm not sure whether there has ever been one into school meals, and we will complete that as soon as possible. As everybody knows, school term finishes at the end of July. So I would hope that we could report back on this perhaps by the December sitting or January if an honourable member. But I'm happy to include all honourable members in that review if you've got concerns. But please, in September, come out to our schools, have a look at what meals are being provided. I've certainly done that a lot this term, and certainly the children seemed to be quite satisfied with the food that they were getting, and there was a very happy environment there. I didn't see anybody miserable during the lunchtime. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary. Ms Farragher.
Could I ask the Minister, how does her department involve students, parents and other stakeholders in the process of reviewing and improving school meals? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I said in my original answer that we've currently been doing it with our school cooks, but as I've just said, now that we're doing a review, we will reach out to further stakeholders to see the best way forward for our meals, but it is down to ensuring that we can provide a sustainable meal in our schools at lunchtime, which should involve a main course, a pudding and a drink. And not a drink, sorry, which people do get confused with, because water is available in all our schools at lunchtime.
Supplementary, Lauder.
Two points, really. The first is, will the Minister undertake to ensure that calorie content is considered as part of the review? I'm sure the Minister would agree that for some this is the main meal of the day, and it was brought out in questions in this place previously that the calories for a school meal are around 600, or a third of the recommended daily intake for a child of primary school age, and of course that varies in itself between 4-year-olds and 11-year-olds. So would she review the flexibility around that based on need, and would she also ensure that as part of this review we start obtaining data from schools about meals that are provided to those who are not eligible for free school meals, because it has been implied in the past in response to recommendations from the Poverty Committee that schools do have the ability to provide meals without necessarily being eligible for free school meals, but there's absolutely no data on how often that has been done. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank the Honourable Member for Russian and Speaker for his question. As I said in my original answer, we do use currently the school food standards, and that provides the recommendations on portion size, cooking techniques, limits on food items. However, with regards to his further comments, I would like to see no waste of any food in our schools, and hopefully that would be because the children are enjoying what is put in front of them. But to do the review is the right thing. There is a new menu that will go out in September for the primary schools. That's already been developed and gone out. However, we will bring in any changes that we feel are appropriate, and also include the secondary schools within this review, because, honourable members, the department is only actually responsible for our primary schools, and we have a catering manager in the department that looks after that. Secondary schools have that independence. They're much larger organisations and they have their independent kitchens, but they do have all qualified people in all of our sites to ensure that they're delivering quality of food. Also, the Honourable Questioner asked about data. As the Honourable Member will know, our schools are the individual data controllers of data. However, I will look into that, and well, it can be part of the review how we gather that data and make sure going forward that there is nobody going home hungry from school.
Supplementary, Mrs. Corlett.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask the Minister, would she commit to a review not only of what is provided, but also how school meals are prepared and delivered. There's a combination of full working kitchens, demi-kitchens, regenerating kitchens, trying to provide over 3,500 meals a day to primary schools. And the cost of this method of mixed delivery surely must be impacting on the department's ability to provide consistently good quality food. I'd like to ask the Minister if she will explore other ways to provide school meals, other than simply going back to fully operational kitchens at every school, and to look at how to find ways to provide that cost effectiveness and to ensure that the quality is consistent.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I'd had school dinners, the dinners were delivered in a metal tin into the kitchen, and although they were quite tasty, you did know they'd been steamed a little bit. We do have excellent kitchens in all of our secondary schools, and I have always been of the opinion, having been on the leadership team of one of our secondary schools, that there is opportunity there to make use of those facilities far more than just for providing the meals for the thing. So certainly I'm happy to commit. Certainly we might not be able to do that full review of the facilities and what we could do going forward, but efficiencies, effectiveness and quality control should be key within the review to make sure that that's consistent delivery for all of our students, no matter where they are in the island.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the Minister for her detailed answers this morning. I would like to pick up a couple of things. Firstly, to question if she has the terms of reference for the review, whether that could be shared, and when the review will be concluded, and then over what period does she anticipate the implementation could be. She will be aware yesterday in Junior Tynwald we had a debate brought by students suggesting more meals should be provided free to children in our schools, and I wondered if that was any part of the review. And similarly, given the increase in cost of living, particularly supermarket prices, is it possible for the current price of a school meal to provide wholesome meals with maximum Manx produce and minimal ultra-processed food for that price, or is it likely that we'll see the cost increase, and will any consideration be given to the eligibility of children for free school meals?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope I've captured all of those questions. With regards to the review, happy to share the way that we're going to approach that. And obviously we have some expertise, but if we did need to bring any in from the outside, that would be another consideration on costs with regard to that. With regards to the time period, as I've said, I'd like to think that we could do the review by Christmas or January. Obviously that's a full term of school, but it's a very busy term as well when we have new students coming into our schools, so I would like to do that. With regards to more free school meals, all honourable members will be aware that this is connected to benefits from the Treasury Department, and it's people that are on any of the income support benefits that receive free school meals. The value of free school meals has not increased in 3 years, and certainly it doesn't operate at a profit at all. It operates at a loss, to be honest, and certainly that will be part of the review. How can we make it sustainable, good quality food going forward? And with regards to access to free school meals, as I say, at the present time that is done through our benefits section, and certainly, you know, we have committed to talk to Treasury with regards to that. I have had the odd conversation with my honourable colleague, Minister Allinson, with regards to this, but until that changes, the current system for free school meals is through the income support related benefits, but I think it's long overdue. We need to do it right, and I will provide updates if there is any delays in anything that we're doing.
School meal cost.
School meal cost.
35.
It is going up slightly in September, but we have limited that to I think it's probably about 5p that it's possibly going up, but I will get that detail and send it through. Certainly that isn't going to cover the costs, but It's minimal to try and support as many people as possible to have that hot quality meal in schools at lunchtime. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Ms Farragher.
Where are you, Actor? It's just a follow-up from my previous question because I didn't hear a response. And I'd like to know, is the department planning to receive and take into account input from parents about the food their children eat? And apologies, Actor, but could I ask the Minister to speak up a little bit, please?
Minister to reply.
Certainly, yes. Apologies, I am looking at the President when I'm speaking, so it might not be travelling my voice. Certainly, I did respond to that. I'd responded to Honourable Member for Garth. I said that we will involve all stakeholders, and I'm happy for all Honourable Members in here. So certainly, if there is an interest, once Mrs Christian, for Honourable Member for Douglas South, is up and running, I'm sure some form of gathering of information from the right stakeholders will take place. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 points, if I may. One is I'd like to correct the Minister where she's told us today that water is freely available. Many water fountains are broken. We heard yesterday from Castle Rushen High School there's no actual water available in the dining hall and there is only one water fountain working. So I wonder if she'd undertake to sort that situation out over the summer while she's got time to get workmen in there and get these fixed. And secondly, we also heard yesterday during Junior Tynwald that the free school meal allowance for secondary school pupils just isn't enough. And so that those pupils can't have a break time snack and then manage to buy a lunch as well. And so will she undertake to look at that in serious like an analysis of data? Because if you can compare those who are on the free school meal cards with those who are on the paid for cards, I think you'll see where the differences lie. So I wonder if she'd undertake to look at that level of granular detail.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Water is available in jugs in our schools, or should be available, and if any honourable member has any concerns like that, please don't hesitate to let me know. However, water fountains will now be the responsibility of our Chief Minister as acting Department of Infrastructure, so I'm happy to work with him over the summer and see what we can do within that area.
Good point, but don't force it.
With regards to the comments in Junior Tynwald yesterday, with regards to the value of a free school meal is not enough, the example that was given by one of the very well-informed students was that students were buying items at break. The purpose of free school meals is to provide a lunchtime meal. It is not for break time. I did speak to the student, I'm not sure which seat she was sat in yesterday, and I said I will look at a way through the card system that we ensure that we limit when that purchase can be made if that's available in the system. However, the key thing is to make sure that our students are well fed. The purpose of free school dinners when they came in after World War II was to provide a hot meal at lunchtime.
Supplementary, Mr Mercer.
Gurmad, Actoran. During Junior Tynwald yesterday, there was some really great contributions from the students here. One of those was on food security. And the use of Manx produce. I would just wonder if the Minister could undertake to review, as part of that review, to see if we can increase the amount of Manx produce used in school meals. Thank you, Mr President.
To reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I do know this comes up regularly and it has been coming up for years. A lot of it is down to availability from the local market. I am aware that we do use Manx meats more than we were in some of the production, but a lot of the production for primary schools is outsourced and to a company, and the meals are brought in. So the recommendation is that they use as much local produce as possible. However, we're all very aware that that could possibly increase the costs. We're already subsidising quite heavily, and that could be an increase in costs, but it's certainly something that the review will look at.
Final supplementary, Mr Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr President. What I would say is that I know a good meal when I see it. And on the 10th of May, I took a trip up to Williston School with the Minister, and we were there over lunchtime, and it was first class. And I pay respect to Max Kelly for doing that. And I'm sure there are a number of other head teachers who do their very best. And that's why I put that on record. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Yes, that you know, it was certainly thanks to the Honourable Member for Douglas North inviting me to go up last minute with him on that day. Nobody knew we were going, and I think that's actually recognition that the food quality is there and it is served to our students. And actually, I wasn't surprised because I am aware of what quality does go out, but it was great to see the students, great to see a salad bar fully stocked and everybody content with the meal that was provided, and there was certainly choice on the menu that day.